recording.
So, first question is, what does consent mean to you?
When it comes to consent, are you clear about what it means? Do you reckon that your parents understand consent? What about your teachers, your caregivers? When we talk about consent, are we all reading the same page, or are we reading from completely different books?
This is something that we need to talk about and educate our youth about.
Young people certainly want to learn about consent.
It's the most ridiculous argument.
It's pretty clear when it comes to consent we have some problems.
Consent needs to really be taught all throughout school.
We have to stop talking in metaphors and we have to start speaking frankly.
It's those behaviours, those jokes, the things that are allowed to go through.
Some people may think, oh, well, that just doesn't happen. We know this rape by trickery is occurring.
These conversations are hard, but they need to be had. Welcome to the ABC's School of Hard Talks.
And my question to the panel is,
the idea behind the School of Hard Talks forum was to engage young people with the decision makers about the issues affecting them. We reached out to several schools across Greater Brisbane and listened to Year 12 students' views about consent education.
The students told us the questions that had been left unanswered despite the national conversation around consent. So we brought the experts in with the students to discuss the issues and talk about how to solve them. Young people wanted to know how the curriculum is changing. Will consent be taught to younger age groups, and how do you reduce the stigma around consent?
Trinity and Lily are Year 12 students that started the group called Students Against Sexual Assault to ensure that young people's voices were being heard. This is what they had to say.
My name is Lily. To me, consent is enthusiastic permission. It's relevant in both sexual and non-sexual contexts. It's relevant from childhood all the way through to adulthood, and it needs to be taught in schools.
Hi, my name is Trinity. To me, consent is nothing more or less than an enthusiastic yes. The conversation around consent this year has absolutely raised awareness in many different areas. However, it's going to take a lot more than the conversation starting and awareness being raised to eradicate the misogyny that really permeates this issue throughout society.
Young people, usually aged 13 to 25, are disproportionately those that are perpetrating and being affected by sexual assault. As such, our opinions, our perspectives on the issue are incredibly relevant to creating a curriculum that can create tangible change.
Educational institutions should be teaching students about sex and consent.
Consent needs to really be taught all throughout school, not just in one grade, not just in one lesson for half an hour. It's an incredibly important part of our society and the way that we interact with each other, and it needs to be taught consistently from a much younger age.
School is the last opportunity that we have with the whole population to influence them and teach them how important consent is in both sexual and non-sexual contexts. So we need to utilise that opportunity to influence young people's opinions and understandings of consent. I guess one of the issues that I don't see being addressed as readily is the smaller things that casualise sexual assault. So rape jokes, pressure to send explicit pictures, catcalling, all of that adds to the casualisation of sexual assault. It perpetuates rape culture and it completely dismisses any consent education that we would employ.
And it's really that normalisation that increases the prevalence of this issue.
Yeah.
The reason that rape culture is so incredibly prevalent is because we don't address it in those normalised conversations.
Yeah, of course.
So I guess our question to the panel is, what will consent education be doing in the future to address the casualisation of sexual assault?
So a really compelling piece from Trinity and Lily. An excellent question. Hayley, can I come to you first? You've been working on the solution. What have you found?
Thanks, Kat. I think I've had about 30 hours of conversation around consent education, and with every conversation I've learned more. We know that we do need to teach it explicitly throughout the years of schooling, so from prep all the way through. It needs to be contextualised within relationships education as well, and we need to provide opportunities for young people to engage in meaningful conversations so that they understand consent, but also understand the drivers around the inappropriate behaviours that they see. So to affect change, we need to empower young people and all people to call out inappropriate behaviour, to be able to detect power imbalances in relationships, and to be skilled and have the right words to address that. So we're planning to strengthen the materials in the curriculum to enable that to occur. But we have to do more than that. It can't just be schools. It's about within schools addressing the environment and the culture around the school, the language that's used.
Well, to that end, I might bring you in, Karen, here, because teachers clearly are going to play a role in this. Are today's teachers equipped with the skills to meet the needs of modern students?
I think we're increasingly seeing the teachers who particularly deliver pastoral care programs in all of our schools are equipped and increasingly are becoming better resourced with material that is relevant to our young people today. And we must continue, as Hayley suggested, to make sure that we're hearing the voices and the experiences of our young people so that we can also enlist their support and understand what they think might be some of the solutions going forward.
Michael, we heard there about the casualisation of sexual assault. We know that letting a joke in poor taste go past or dismissing someone's experience contributes to what we understand as the bystander effect. How do you address that problem through sexual consent education?
Well, I think we need to understand that consent is actually a continuum. So the end of the road is where we see the actual sexual assault cases happening. But if we go upstream a little bit, we'll figure out that the actual continuum of behaviour started with, as Hayley said and as the student said before, it's those behaviours, those jokes, the things that are allowed to go through. And the bystanders who quite often stand around, sometimes they're embarrassed, sometimes they're scared, sometimes they're shy, but quite often they are utterly impervious to the fact that there is an effect upstream or downstream, as the case may be. It's getting those bystanders the skills, the courage and the ability to speak out and speak out early, because it is confronting to deal with someone when a sexual assault is happening. That's a dangerous, confronting, scared place to be. But it's a lot easier to intervene when you can tell someone, hey, mate, not on, that joke's just going a little bit too far. It's so much easier, safer, psychologically more comfortable to do it then. So I think we've got to find a way to intervene earlier. Parents, students, teachers, society, jokes, media. Earlier intervention means we're not stopping a runaway train after it's gathered speed.
And Marisha, you're working in classrooms. How might you encourage a young person to call something out? That's quite a daunting prospect. In classroom scenarios, there may be consequences. What sort of scenarios would you describe or tools would you offer?
Yeah, so often in our sessions, we go through an activity called the parent control wheel. So that helps identify certain red flags, as we like to call it, in relationships that not a lot of people can identify, and some might experience, but they don't know exactly what the issue is. Like, they feel uncomfortable for some reason, but don't know why. What we do is hold conversations with the kids in the class and be like, you know, what are you most comfortable doing? Are you someone who's an active bystander who's able to just be like, hey mate, that's not on? We encourage them to take on what they can, and if they feel uncomfortable, then seek out other help. So it could be having an adult there or having a trusted friend there when you're having conversations with either those who are perpetrating those acts of violence, or if the victims are the ones who need the most support. Yeah.
All right, so those clear conversations, so important. And with the notion of clarity in mind, let's move to our next question.
To cross into the action zone, both people must agree.
Do you want to try my milkshake?
Hi everyone, I'm Shreyas, and my question to the panel is, to what extent do you believe that the obscure metaphors used by the government regarding sexual consent, for instance the milkshake ad, have been detracting from the overall message that they're trying to convey?
An excellent question, and I might come to you, Adair. What grade would you give that government campaign?
First of all, it's a great question. And when I looked at the work that Trinity and Lily did there, I thought that there is far more effective than any milkshake campaign that we're ever going to have. You know, for me, working with youth, I thought that it was patronising. I thought I couldn't believe that they spent $3.1 million on that resource. And I didn't think it was helpful at all. What we should be doing is we should be talking to you about real cases and what is going to be the consequences. Because the more that we keep on regarding you as a problem to be solved rather than you being the solution, and rather than, you know, backing you, I think you are the most incredible generation because you want to know more, you want to bring about change. And I think that what we need to be able to do with any of the resources we're giving you is that it needs to be real.
When you say that, real and real cases, I mean, if we look at the law, there aren't metaphors involved in the law. It's pretty clear cut.
No, well, when it comes to, certainly when we're dealing with consent and the laws regarding consent, there's a lot of people that still don't understand it because there's a lot of grey areas. We really need to be having some pretty frank conversations about, okay, this is what will happen and this will be what the consequences are.
Karen, I see you nodding there. I'm just wondering first off though, what your reaction to the milkshake campaign was, and as well, given your position as the board chair for Independent Schools Queensland, what was their reaction? Was any one of your schools keen to implement the materials in classrooms?
I think it's fair to say, and thank you for raising the question, Shreyas, that certainly that campaign fell flat. It didn't meet the needs of probably anybody, I would imagine. What it certainly didn't do is take into account that we're dealing with young people who are mature and intelligent people. We have to stop talking in metaphors and we have to start speaking frankly, using real life examples and using the examples and experiences of our young people and listening to what will be the solutions for them.
So are there any metaphors in the new curriculum, Hayley?
No, there are not any new metaphors in the curriculum, and we heard that loud and clear from the students we consulted with.
All right, well, we've been hearing about the need for fulsome and frank conversations in classrooms and at schools. So with that in mind, let's hear from our next student representative with our next question.
Hey, my name is Adara. My question for the panel is, if individuals have consented to a sexual relationship or sexual act previously, how do we eliminate the stigma of they've given me consent before, I don't need to ask for it again?
Consent can never be assumed. And just because somebody has consented previously and just because that you have been in a relationship with someone doesn't mean that that consent is always going to be freely given. And that's why we need to be having these conversations more and more. Because again, there is some myths out there that, for instance, husbands can't rape wives, for instance. That's rubbish. Husbands can rape wives. There was a case very recently where a husband was found liable in relation to the sexual assault that he committed upon his wife.
And these are conversations that you're having with adults as part of some of the work that you do with sporting codes. For instance, can you give us some idea of the kinds of scenarios you might paint in an adult context?
One of the ones we show is a situation where a young woman is in a bar and she goes home with two men. She has consensual, you don't see any of this obviously, but she has consensual sex with the first fellow. He comes out and he beckons his friend to go in there. And it's in a darkened room, and then she comes out and says, I didn't consent to him. And the fellas are saying, they got lucky, etc. Now, some people may think, well, that just doesn't happen. But we know this rape by trickery is occurring, and it's morally wrong. But what we want to talk about is going to be what is legally wrong.
Marisha, you're working in classrooms. Are those kinds of scenarios what we need more of?
I think people learn the best when they can contextualize a lot of things. So, putting ourselves in their shoes, giving real life examples of things that they would see in everyday life is what makes the difference. So, yeah.
Michael, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think working in this space for the last 15 years or so, I've seen an evolution of even the educational messages. So initially, one of the mantras that used to go around was no means no. And the problem with that is there was so much left then to interpretation, because sometimes if someone's showing physical signs of withdrawal, if they're asleep, if they're drunk, if they're passed out, if they're coerced, if there's a power relationship, you may not hear a no. Now the new mantra is very much only yes means yes, which is a whole lot different. It's a world apart from a well-intentioned no means no in the 10, 15 years ago. No doesn't mean maybe. It's not shopping at a farmer's market where that's a starting point for a bargaining. Right? So many young people say, well, I got a no, and I use that as that's a negotiation point for a maybe later. I say to the students I work with, if you hear a no, it's game over for the time being. There is no maybe. It's not a starting point.
And Lily and Trinity made that very clear when they both said enthusiastic yes.
And so what we're seeing is that's where the law is going. So the law is evolving, and down in New South Wales they've introduced laws which is all about affirmative consent there, where it has to be a positive by their action or by their words. So these days where someone could just say, oh, well, she or he was quiet, so therefore I thought it was still okay. No, that's not going to pass muster anymore.
We're going to return to the letter of the law a little later, but we might move to our next question.
My name's Patrick, and my question is, why isn't consent taught to primary school age children in a soft way that they could understand?
Marisha, let me come to you because you do teach consent to preppies. Can you give us a sense of how that looks?
So when we go out for younger year levels, I'll be like, if Michael's my friend, I would ask him, Michael, can I hold your hand? Simple examples like that. And if Michael says yes, then Michael has given consent. Michael can change his mind. Michael can also, if visibly Michael hesitates or he looks uncomfortable, then it is my job and my responsibility to be checking in on Michael. It starts from simple things like hugs. You know, often we're in family environments where our parents will ask us and be like, you know, go and say hi to your auntie, go say hi to your uncle. And what that hi may look like is up to you. So whether it's a hug, a kiss on the cheek, a handshake, that is something that needs to be taught to our children, that it's okay if we don't want to give that.
The new curriculum, Hayley, can you give us a sense of how preppies might learn about consent from next year?
Yeah, so we picked up on the feedback, so we'll certainly have a number of lessons in the curriculum around consent or seeking permission, denying permission, understanding that body autonomy and establishing and setting boundaries. Actually need to do better with linking the concepts through the years, but we certainly have that addressed from prep all the way through.
So sort of looking precisely at sexual consent education, will that be made compulsory from next year?
So it's part of the health and physical education curriculum, and it's also, we'll be strengthening our respect for relationships education programs.
Could a school elect not to?
No.
They could not.
It's going to be embedded. Yep.
We're going to keep moving and invite our next student question.
Hello, my name is Feba, and my question is, why is our current consent-based education so focused on a woman's experience of consent when sexual violence cases against men also exist?
Because it's hard to ignore the figures. I mean, men account for the large majority of sexual assault offenders, 97%, and that's across all age groups in the police recorded data. Men are the majority perpetrators of sexual assault against women, but also against other men. So we have a problem here, Michael. Men seem to maybe not want to talk about. What's your assessment?
For any other aspect of life, we don't look at victims. With national security, terrorism, whatever, we're always looking at who's doing it. And this is one area, sexual assault and domestic violence, is one area where we're constantly talking about what are women doing to stay safe. We shouldn't be asking the question. We should be asking the question, why are men or why are any perpetrators raping, hurting, damaging, murdering people, not the conversation about victims?
Young men comfortable in coming forward to talk about their experience of being sexually assaulted or abused?
I think men underreport male sexual assault by a huge amount. So again, there's a stigma around it. And again, the stigma is Why should you be embarrassed that you've been a victim of assault? It's not your fault. But again, the main perpetrators tend to be other men. The conversation that not all men, it's the most ridiculous argument. We know it's not all men. If you are not that man, don't feel guilty, don't be offended, because you know you're not that man. Just be a man that will call out some of the other behaviours.
We're heading out to Rochdale State High School, which is about 20 minutes out of the city, to talk to Melody and Brandon.
In my group of friends, consent is not something that we're constantly talking about, but when it does come up in conversation, obviously we're all very passionate about it. It needs to be talked about a lot more, not just, in your social group, but in the whole education system, online, everything, just to make people more aware of the whole construct of consent and what giving consent actually looks like, what it sounds like, and on the other hand, what it doesn't look like, what giving consent isn't. That's something that we don't really look at too much, because sometimes people do say yes, but it's not necessarily because they want to, it's because they feel like they have to. And I think that's something that we need to talk about a lot more.
I want more people to know that consent is not a fad, that it is serious, that it is something that impacts everybody, and it is really important. Consent is so much more than just asking a yes or no question. It's about respecting people's boundaries that they've set up for any multitude of reasons, and understanding that that boundary is something that deserves to be respected. Consent's not just a hypothetical, and it is a day-to-day thing, and not in just sexual situations, but also romantic situations, and it's always serious, not just in cases of sexual assault.
We're speaking about a cultural shift here, and with that in mind, let's hear our next question.
Hi, my name is Goen. My question to the panel is, in regards to changing the culture about talking about consent, how do we engage parents to also guide the children on what consent is? Or do you think that schools should take the prominent role in creating these opportunities?
I think if you're leaving it purely to schools, we are completely abrogating our responsibilities as functioning humans. Schools have an incredibly important role to play, but I think it is massively overselling the 7 hours a day at schools. Why is it the teacher's fault, the principal's fault for the stuff that's happening in society? It can't be.
Karen, do you think schools are asked to do too much? Do you cop too much of the burden of responsibility?
I think it's a really important point that you raise, Goan, and that we have to engage with our parents, because as we've just heard, the parents are the primary carers and responsible for their young people. There's no doubt that schools have a part to play in this, but so do workforces, so do other employers, so do community groups, sporting groups.
What we need to be doing is getting into the workforce. There's this wonderful opportunity for employers to be more proactive on this.
I mean, if you're the host of a party, what happens?
Well, this is the thing. The incredible Chanel Contos that came forward earlier this year, a 23-year-old woman that came forward and started talking about the rape culture that existed in schools. So 3,918 people reached out and they shared their trauma. Of those 3,918 that shared their trauma, I think that I could count on them, because I went through and read the majority of them, but I could count on my hand how many actually occurred at the school. Where did they occur? They occurred at private parties. They occurred at different functions, different places. So, that's where we really need to be educating parents about, you need to take steps. Now, parents can find themselves liable if they don't supervise a gathering and an episode occurs. So whether it be a sexual assault, or alternatively whether it be a fight, something along those lines. If they're not properly supervising, the parents can find themselves liable in relation to that.
Let's stay with the subject of schools.
Hi, I'm Minnie, and my question for the panel is, within an already packed school curriculum, how is the government allocating more time and more resources into consent and sex education?
So on the question of time first, Hayley, how much time does the government currently require Queensland state schools to spend on sexual consent education?
There isn't a time component that's set out in the current curriculum. So we are looking to unclutter the curriculum. I think when we talk about teaching around relationships and consent within that, there are some of those foundation skills that apply across a number of health issues. So if we are embedding those skills for young people to be resilient, to be help seekers, to be decision makers, problem solvers, and have those skills, then that will apply across relationships education education and other areas.
I mean, this is a very important issue.
Yeah.
Should it be looked at as just as important as maths and English?
Yeah, I think it should be.
We're going to the CBD to talk to people about their views on consent education.
I think consent should be taught at school by being open-minded and having an open conversation with the students.
Understanding what it means and how to say no, I think is really important. I went to an all-girls school, so it definitely wasn't taught to me.
I never learned that at school. If you are too young, you cannot understand. If you are too old, like you will say, okay, I already know that. But I think the good age is between 10 to 12.
I wasn't taught consent at school, no. It should be based on research and how best kids can be taught. You need to find out first.
I think we'd better have our next student question.
Hello, my name's Nikisha. Before I jump in, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which we meet. I would like to welcome you all to this land where we gather today, paying my respects to our elders past, present and emerging. My question to you all is, do you think it's possible to teach consent, or is it going to be the same as teaching climate change?
Marisha, you are all about respectful relationships education, so is it possible?
R for Respect is a perfect example of how consent can be taught, and it is a possibility. Like, you know, we're out there every week talking to young people about respect for relationships, about red flags, about consent, and what that looks like for you and boundaries for you.
Karen, we do understand that this is something that still comes at the discretion of a principal or a school board, that not every single classroom and every single school in Queensland will receive the same sort of consent education. So do you have faith that it won't become a too hard basket problem?
I have faith that as educators, we want to make a difference in the lives of our young people, and we recognise that we need to hear your experiences, and that consent education is such an area that needs transparency and open conversation, communication forums such as this, and schools that are serious about making a difference in the lives of their young people will make sure consent education works.
I think that, the question that you asked, I think it's a great question. The short answer is I think we can teach consent, and we've shown that we can teach consent. But I stick to that narrow definition of what consent is, and to start, and the basic building block should be teaching people what the law is. So I don't think it's as difficult as climate change to bring about, to make a difference there. I do think parents have got a lot to learn, and where they can learn it from is it's from youth.
Yeah, look, I'm looking around the room here, and I'm seeing the future of mankind here. And to me, I almost want to throw the ball back into the court and say some of the lessons and the teachings and the advancement is going to come from your generation. This generation can actually take it out of our control. I mean, we're kind of a little bit out of their world. If they can, amongst themselves, call each other out and hold each other accountable, I think there's a powerful, powerful movement for change amongst that generation.
Hayley, the new curriculum rolls out from next year. Is this the end of the conversation?
No, I think it's just the beginning, that the conversation is finally getting the air that it needs. So I think what we'll see is that we'll build momentum, we'll continue to learn, and we'll continue to seek the views of students and community around what's important in this space and adapt our delivery to that.
Right now, we've done the hard part, we've got the conversation started, and I can only see good things from there.
But to me, consent is not just a simple question and answer.
The topic of consent has changed massively.
This is a bigger conversation and needs to occur between families, schools, workplaces, friends, and friendship groups as well.
While I think the discussion of consent has been made more accessible, I don't think much has changed in terms of people learning about consent.
Consent to me is a basic human right. It just needs to be talked about a lot more than it is.
People still don't understand it, and more needs to be told and said about it.
Consent isn't just a one-time conversation. It needs to be consistent, it needs to be constant, and it needs to be reinforced.
the urgency we once had has kind of fizzled out.
So there is certainly a problem in the way that consent is taught at the moment.
It could be taught much more frequently.
Particularly how it applies to our lives in our life context.
Instead of telling students about consent, they should really be asking students the questions and allowing students to get the conversation started themselves. Because through getting a conversation started, we can ultimately achieve change much more effectively than ever before.
Thank you for being a part of today's School of Hard Talks. This has been a very important moment in the conversation, but it has been just one moment. There will be many more to come. I encourage you to continue the good work that you're already doing. You are part of the solution. My name is Kat Feeney. Thank you for your time.